When two countries sign some big, important deal, we all focus on the substance, right? The terms, the commitments, the big handshake for the cameras. But what if I told you that how that agreement is presented, its name, its structure, even the words it carefully avoids, is actually a huge part of the deal itself? That's what we're going to unpack today.
So here's a puzzle you've probably noticed if you follow the news. You have this historic agreement, but one is called a treaty, the next one is a pact, and another one is just a memorandum of understanding. Are these just fancy interchangeable words that diplomats throw around, or is there something much, much deeper going on here?
Well, it all comes down to this. The form an agreement takes is a super powerful strategic tool. Negotiators use it to signal importance, to create legal obligations, or, and this is the really clever part, to make it easier for leaders to make difficult, politically risky concessions. Yeah, the packaging, that's where the real art of diplomacy kicks in. Okay, so to really get this, we have to start with the heaviest hitter in the diplomatic world. Let's talk about the most formal, the most high-stakes type of agreement there is. So this here is the official definition from the Vienna Convention. And that little phrase right there, create legal obligations, that's the key. When something is a treaty, it's meant to be legally binding. And countries take this stuff very seriously. Because if you get a reputation for breaking your promises, good luck getting anyone to negotiate with you in the future. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While lots of agreements are technically treaties, saving the official title treaty with that capital T is reserved for the really big ones. We're talking about agreements that end huge wars, like the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, or ones that create massive alliances, like the North Atlantic Treaty that gave us NATO. And you can totally see why this feels so momentous when you look at the formal structure. This whole thing is designed to look and feel, well, imposing. You've got a preamble naming the heads of state, numbered articles, final clauses, and it all wraps up with these official seals and signatures. This isn't just a piece of paper, it's a whole ceremony. But here's the thing. All that ceremony, it can be a massive political headache. So what happens when leaders need a deal, but they just can't afford all the drama of a full-blown treaty? Well, that's when they opt for convenience. I mean, think about it. The formal treaty process is basically a political minefield. The drafting is super complicated, it attracts a ton of media attention you might not want, and, this is the big one, it usually has to be ratified by your legislature. That can cause huge delays and carries the very real risk that your own government will torpedo the deal you just spent months negotiating. So, diplomats turn to these genius workarounds. An exchange of notes is now the most common form of international agreement. It's basically just a formal letter and a reply. Boom, done. Quick, quiet, and effective. And a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, goes even further. It often ducks legal language completely, using words like commitment instead of obligation to signal, hey, this is a political promise, not a court-enforceable contract. Okay, now we get to the really, really clever stuff. Beyond just being convenient, the packaging of a deal is used to solve one of the single biggest problems in any negotiation: how to let a leader make a big concession without looking weak or foolish back home. This is the true art of saving face. Our first technique is the simple but incredibly powerful euphemism. It's all about swapping out a harsh word for a softer one, to help the medicine go down a little easier for one side. This is just a perfect example. In the 1988 Accords to end the war in Afghanistan, the Soviets had to pull their troops out. But for a superpower, admitting defeat, that's humiliating. So what was the solution? The text never says Soviet troops, not once. Instead, it just carefully refers to the withdrawal of foreign troops, a simple word choice that allowed the Kremlin to sign on the dotted line. All right, technique number 2 is a classic move, straight out of a contract's playbook. You hide the most sensitive point in the fine print. You can bury a concession deep inside a long document, or, even better, move it into a separate, less visible side letter. The Camp David Accords are an absolute masterclass in this. The status of Jerusalem was so explosive it could have torpedoed the entire peace deal. The fix? Both sides stated their positions, not in the main treaty itself, but in separate side letters. This was genius. It let the Egyptians show their public, see, we raised the issue, while the Israelis could tell theirs that it wasn't even part of the main agreement. This next technique takes that small print idea and dials it up to 11. Instead of just hiding a tricky point in an appendix, what if you could hide the entire connection between two deals? Well, you do that by splitting one big agreement into two documents that look separate. Here's how this solved a huge deadlock in southern Africa. The deal was a pretty simple trade. South Africa gets out of Namibia, and Cuba gets out of Angola. The problem was the Angolans had been publicly saying no way to that linkage for years. It was a matter of national pride. The solution was brilliant. They just created two separate agreements signed on the same day. In practice, the link was real, but on paper, Angola never had to formally admit it existed. And finally, we've got the politics of language itself. Today, writing a treaty in the language of each country is pretty common. It's a sign of respect, of equality, but as you can probably guess, this comes with some pretty serious risks. This is probably one of the most infamous cautionary tales in all of diplomacy. This 1889 treaty between Italy and Ethiopia had two versions that were supposed to be equally authentic, but the Amharic version said Ethiopia could use Italy for its foreign relations. The Italian one said Ethiopia must. That one little verb, a permissive could versus a mandatory must, turned a partnership into a power grab. And yeah, 6 years later, it led directly to war. And sometimes, the high-minded politics of language just smacks right into a wall of pure practicality. Back in 1808, a British diplomat named Robert Adair got chewed out by his bosses in London. Why? Because he wrote a peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire in French, not English. His defense was pretty simple. Hey, the other guy's interpreter didn't speak a word of English, and signing a document you literally can't read is, a very bad idea. So after all these techniques, euphemisms, side letters, sneaky wording, you might be thinking, isn't this all just a bunch of deceptive tricks? Well, let's pull it all together, because it's not that simple. Here's the most important takeaway. These packaging methods aren't shady or disreputable. They're actually a fundamental part of the art of negotiation. In many cases, they are the essential tools that allow leaders to navigate the incredible political pressures they're under back home when they're trying to make peace. And that's the real magic of clever packaging. By using these tools, diplomats give leaders the political cover they desperately need to make tough compromises. It allows them to say yes to a deal without getting destroyed by their own supporters. It turns problems that seem totally intractable into something that's actually solvable. So, the next time you see a headline about some new international accord or joint plan of action, don't just read the big print. Look deeper. Ask yourself, why was it named that way? What's really hiding in the side letters? What difficult concession is being softened with some careful wording? Because now you know the packaging isn't just the wrapping paper. It's often where the real secrets of the deal are hidden.